94.9 The River Music First. I'm Rochelle. We have an author interview today. Really excited to have in town and in studio Don Miguel Ruiz Jr. Welcome to our studio.
Hi, Rochelle. Thank you so much for having me. It's such an honor. Thank you.
I can't believe I missed you last time, so I'm so glad. Not going to miss you this time.
Yay.
You're doing a signing tonight at Rediscovered Books.
Yes, tonight at 7 o'clock.
7 o'clock. I'm told to get there very early because this time everybody knows you're here. And
oh, nice.
It's going to be really packed. So at least a half hour is what I think Patty told me down at Rediscovered Books. You've got a couple of books. Do you want to talk about what you've written so far and your newest?
Well, yeah, I'm going to be talking tonight about the Mastery of Self, which in reality I'm going to be talking about all three books I have, but it's basically that moment where, you have an aha moment and you've reached this stage in your own process, and then you ask yourself, now what? I don't live isolated in an ashram. I don't live isolated in a monastery. I don't live isolated in the hill. I live in my environment. So how do I stay in my discipline as I engage the dream of the planet? Or I engage my community, my friends, my family. And that's what this book's about. It's like, how do I, after this long journey within our inner self, how do we begin to share that? So that's, in essence, what the book's about, the ability to engage everyone I love.
And let's back up to, this isn't just another great book about positivity, but let's back up to your father and the great book he has written in books.
Yes.
And do a little background for people who aren't familiar of the Toltec traditions and your grandmother and all of that, so they can kind of get caught up on who you are.
Oh, sure. Well, my father is an author named Don Miguel Ruiz. He wrote a book called The Four Agreements and the Mastery of Love. And he's the son also of Madre Sarita, my grandmother. You can say some people ask me if I'm following my father's footsteps, but I'm really following hers, because she's the first one to decide to share the Toltec tradition with the community. Before that, it was kind of taboo to teach it outside of it. That's sometimes the ancestry, the Toltec. The Toltec in English means artist, and over 500 years ago, they existed as a society in central Mexico. And with the expansion of the Aztec Empire or the expansion of the Spanish Empire, they ceased to be a civilization and they were conquered. And the tradition became an oral tradition, which you share from one generation to another through stories and basically these concepts. But every generation teaches it in their own unique way. So up until my grandmother's father, Don Leonardo, they only kept it within the family, and they only kept those teachings, those stories within that small circle of people. Mind you, my grandmother is the youngest of 13, and my father is also the youngest of 13. So there's a huge family. So there's the perspective. They're teaching it to a lot of people, but outside the family. And my grandmother decided to share that, share that with the community. She opened a small little temple in San Diego, California, where she began to do sermons and lectures. She also was a faith healer, so she did that in that way.
And what time period was that happening?
This is 1970s, 1980s, beginning of 1990s in San Diego, California. And during that time, my father was a neurosurgeon in Mexico, in Tijuana, and he had an event in his life that changed his perception. He began to apprentice with my grandmother, and he let go of the medical profession and began to teach and being a complete apprentice to that. And he combined the language of medicine and science and combined the stories of the Toltec and created it and put it into a language we can all understand. So you can say the Four Agreements, that book, the intro, the story of the smoky mirror is the story of that we grew up with in the Toltec tradition, and the rest of it is in a language that we can all relate to. It doesn't have, you don't really need a certain ancestry to understand, because we all understand it, we all live it. And that's how we approach it. So the Mastery of Self, for example, in the Toltec tradition would be called controlled folly. But for me to explain what controlled folly is, you already, it takes a while. So Mastery of Self, that's the translation in a certain way. And that makes we get it. We understand the whole concept.
Sure.
That's the example of what we're doing in our family tradition. We're putting something that we think it's ancestral, and we're putting it into a language that we can all understand.
When you had something that was so special and traditional and magical to your family, and then someone decided to share with anyone, was there any resistance to that? Like, no, this is ours?
To a certain degree, I know my father and my grandmother faced that more than I did. You know, by the time I remember growing up, and there was still that little bit of a taboo that existed. But as time progressed, I would say that, for example, if you take the difference between Mexico and the United States, you know, in Mexico, the 1960s were more of a political revolution rather than a spiritual one. Here in the States, it was not just political, as we all know, a civil rights movement and everything, the anti-war movement. There was also a spiritual movement as well. And so you can say that a lot of the work here in the States, there was already that spiritual desire to know outside of our family's tradition. We want to know what the world has to offer. So you can say 1960s opened up this opportunity that by the time my father and my grandmother started teaching in the 1970s and 80s, there was already a language established to a certain degree. So like you can say that whatever resistance there was, it was short-lived because of that. By 1990s, you know, you can say that spirituality, not just with the Toltec, but, you know, you have Deepak Chopra, Wayne Dyer, you know, you have the teachings of Yogananda, Marianne Williamson, and all these wonderful traditions are now, I wouldn't want to call them mainstream because they're not really mainstream yet, you know, but you can say that it's more accessible. You know, we live in an age where we can learn from the ancestors of South Asia, of Africa, of Europe, and South America, and all around the world, because we have the internet that's teaching us and bringing us all together. And all we have to do in order to find it was you can Google it, you know, as opposed to 20 years or 30 years ago, you have to really look for it. You have to, you know, like the way someone looks for an independent band, you know, you listen for that indie music, you know, you like the Velvet Underground wasn't mainstream. You had to look for the Velvet Underground, you know, understand who Lou Reed was. Well, back then, you know, you had to look for Castaneda, you had to look for Wayne Dyer. Nowadays, we share it with so much gusto that it's that taboo is gone to a certain degree. We can do yoga. You know, it's yoga used to have the same feel, you know, the same resistance. Now it's everywhere, and it's changing for the good or bad, depending on the point of view. But that's the nice thing. You know, we recognize within my family that it's an awesome opportunity, because 3 or 4 generations prior to us, they didn't have that opportunity. It was such a thing that you would be considered maybe a traitor, but mostly just someone that you're not supposed to teach outside of this particular idea or philosophy. Right. Now we're in a stage where, you know, we can listen to the masters of any religion and have, you know, a wonderful experience to learn from one another. And that's the, you know, we can see the beauty of humanity and the dark side of humanity all rolling into one. And if you're willing to expand your awareness, to expand how someone else dreams their life, all we have to do is just engage. For example, right now you're giving me the opportunity to share, and you know, I celebrate that. You know, I enjoy it, and I'm grateful.
Well, I'm grateful too, and I think the world is grateful that you have shared your traditions and continue to do so. I was curious that since your grandmother started these traditions and your father went on and you've done yours, with each generation, how have these traditions and stories been modified with the times changing in the world?
Well, you can say that life is our great teacher. You know, we you know, if I were to teach it as is, you know, like a textbook, then I'd be reading from a book the whole time and just never looking up. I'd be always reading down, and this is exactly how it's supposed to be. My family, the way we are taught these lessons is life experience. You know, like the way my father, for example, taught me how to speak in front of an audience. You know, he invited me to an event here in Jackson Hole, Wyoming, and it was the first time I ever seen him speak to a crowd of 1,000 people. Wow. Then he asked me, Miguel, come on up. Like, I want to introduce you to my son. And I thought he was just going to say hello, goodbye, you know, just, you know, because I knew that it was towards the end of his presentation. he gave me the microphone and he walked off stage.
Wow.
So I either had a choice to walk behind him or open my mouth, and I haven't been able to shut up since. And it's those kind of lessons that, you know, that we're taught. You know, the 5 levels of attachment. My first book is really the story of Tezcatlipocatl, you know, the smoky mirror, how about this man who discovers that there's a fog that doesn't allow us to see beyond the tips of our nose, and the process that he goes through to dissipate that smoke and go through the whole process of letting go and detaching. Well, I tell that story in my own unique way. You know, like I learned it through watching my own attachment to soccer, for example.
Okay.
You know, it's like I see the fanaticism that happens when you go to a soccer game and someone's wearing the wrong jersey, and how people are about to beat on a person, and they have no idea who they are. They have no idea what their name is. They don't know what their backgrounds. They only see the jersey. They only see the shirt, and because they see the shirt, this person now becomes the living symbol of something they don't agree with,
right.
And they don't see their humanity. And when you don't see the humanity, well, that's where that violence comes in, and that lack of respect. And you know, that's where, if you see that with soccer, you see that with religion, you see that with politics, we see that with the way we eat, with music. You know, with music, oh, you're supposed to only listen to hip hop. No, we're only supposed to listen to rock. Or no, we're supposed to listen to reggae. No, rockabilly or ska or punk, or you know, they have this division. So the way you can see how we're already distorting beautiful traditions in that way, but to detach from them is to no longer corrupt those traditions, to let them be the instrument, the knowledge that allows us to share. And you know, music is this thing that speaks to our soul. Knowledge is this thing that allows us to see life from a different point of view. But they're both instruments that inform our choices, and we're the ones making the choice.